Adults are being cut off by their kids. Christians are losing their jobs for speaking up. It's an expectation to be hated. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Righteousness is despised by a fallen world.
This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. Today we're thinking biblically about worldview, apologetics, and parenting in an increasingly secular world. I'm joined by Natasha Crain, a best-selling author and apologist who equips Christians to engage culture with clarity and confidence. She also recently came on the advisory board of the Institute for Faith and Culture. You can listen to this episode of the City of God on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Or you can watch the full video version on YouTube or crm.tv. And now, let's welcome Natasha Crain to the City of God. So Natasha, many Christians today think that the culture has totally turned against the beliefs of Christianity. Is that just perception or reality?
Well, I think that it is absolutely reality. I mean, we see this everywhere around us, and people that I talk to, they feel this. They are experiencing it in their day-to-day lives. So, for example, I talk to parents nearly everywhere I go who, with tears in their eyes, will talk about the fact that their adult children are cutting them off. And they're saying, you're too toxic. You know, just the fact that you're a Christian and what you believe about something like gender or sexuality, about abortion, you hold these beliefs that are toxic, they're oppressive to people. I don't even want to be around you. And so adults are being cut off by their kids, or their kids are not letting them see their grandkids just because they're considered to be so toxic. Christians are losing their jobs for speaking up and saying, hey, this is something I can't participate in, or this is what I believe. So there is a perception, of course, that people have about the hostility of the culture, but that perception does seem to be rooted in reality of what people are actually experiencing.
And Natasha, there's a lot of debate of whether America was founded as a Christian nation or not, but the facts speak for themselves. Whether it was founded as a Christian nation or not, it's very clear that it was the Christian worldview that shaped the founding of our country. It shaped Western civilization, even going back 80 years ago, whether it was Western Europe or America. 80% of the population was biblically literate. Christianity was the predominant worldview and religion of society. Is it fair to say in the 21st century that Christians now find themselves as a cultural minority?
Oh, absolutely. And there's research that points to that. And the two statistics that I'm regularly pointing people to are these. Number one, if you poll people, which the Pew Forum does, and you ask them, how do you identify yourself? Christians there 65% of people will say, I'm a Christian. So in one sense, you can say that Christians are about 65% of the population today. So a lot of people, especially non-believers, will look at that and say, oh, well, how can you guys complain? You guys aren't a minority. According to all the research, nearly 2 out of every 3 people in this country are Christians. But we have to understand that the nature of that research is such that you're asking people how you identify yourself. And so you can put that label on yourself for all kinds of reasons, right? One person might say, well, I grew up in a Christian home. I guess, I don't take it very seriously, but I'm a Christian, for example. They can say that for all kinds of reasons. But the more interesting number is what percent actually have a biblical worldview, meaning that they're seeing all of reality through the lens of what the Bible teaches. And according to the research that comes from Arizona Christian University's Cultural Research Center under Dr. George Barna, only about 4% of Americans have a biblical worldview. So this is based on directly asking people questions about what they believe, not just, hey, how do you identify yourself? So if you think about that gap between a majority saying, yes, I'm a Christian, and a tiny, tiny minority who hold the beliefs that you would assume to be consistent with what the Bible teaches, you can see very clearly that while people might call themselves Christians, real Christians meaning according to their beliefs, are a very small and shrinking minority today.
Natasha, your latest book, When Culture Hates You, which I had the privilege of endorsing and have spread to so many family members and friends, is just a great resource to understand what's happening in our culture. Explain the title in a nutshell. What's the book all about, and what really led you to write it?
Yeah, well, the book is called When Culture Hates You, and I chose the title very specifically not because the culture hates every single thing that every single Christian does and says. That's not the case. But the book title is When Culture Hates You, because when the culture does hate you, you have to know how to respond as a Christian. And that is a when. It's not just an if. And so my hope with the book was really to help Christians understand that it's an expectation to be hated, that Jesus told his followers exactly why they would be hated. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. That's what he told them. And I think it's so important to understand that he connects that explanation of being of the world, that if you are a child of Satan, if you are not a child of God and you are under the governing influence of Satan, then people will love you as their own. But when you're a child of God, now you are of the Lord, and people are going to hate you for that because righteousness is despised by a fallen world. And that's really what the source of this hatred is that the slaves to sin will hate the slaves to righteousness. And when we start to understand that, we start to not be so surprised by it.
I think it's ironic, though, because for decades we've said that the answer is secularism. If we could just detach God and a common morality from the public square, we would advance, we would be liberated, there would be more freedom and flourishing. And they always told us, right, the cultural elites, you'll still be able to believe whatever you want to believe, but we can just kind of live in this utopian society where everybody gets along. Obviously, we're paying the price, and we're experiencing the fatal fruit of, in many ways, churches and pastors buying into that lie for so many decades. So if Christianity is not the predominant worldview that we've been lied to about tolerance, what then is the predominant worldview that is really shaping the West and shaping the next generation?
Well, people have all kinds of different beliefs today. In fact, Dr. Barna, whose research I referred to earlier, says that if you look at what people believe according to all the data that they have, 88% of people in America have an incoherent worldview, meaning that the things that they believe don't even fit together logically. And I find that absolutely fascinating. People aren't thinking about what they believe. So if you ever talk to somebody and you're asking questions about what they believe and you're thinking, wow, this doesn't all make sense together, you're right. The research shows that 88% of people believe in things that don't fit together at all. And so I think that ultimately the tie that functionally binds the worldviews of millions of people who otherwise have totally different beliefs is the authority of the self rather than the authority of God. That's ultimately what we're surrounded by. People can believe all kinds of different things, but so ironically, when everyone is believing different things, it just comes back to this commonality that they believe in themselves. It's the authority of myself to determine what is true about reality, what is good or bad, right or wrong, harmful or helpful. That's the worldview that we're surrounded by. And ironically, that's what the Bible tells us every single human being is going to struggle with by our very nature. We all want to go our own way, right? So that's why it's so compelling even to us as Christians. We get confused by this because we know we should be going God's way, but when the predominant worldview that surrounds us is one where they're saying, hey, come over here, the water's warm, you get to decide what's true. It's whatever makes you feel good. It's whatever makes you happiest. We start to think, well, yeah, I kind of believe that. I kind of think that some of that is true. And we start pulling in some of those very secular beliefs into our biblical worldview, and we end up with a lot of confusion. We end up with the kinds of statistics that I mentioned earlier, where only 4% of people have a biblical worldview.
Now, the church is much to blame for the condition that we find ourselves in today. And you could say on the one hand, the church is to blame for just silent pulpits, for pastors that lack the courage. But there's also pastors that have an agenda. You've written extensively on the rise of progressive Christianity, which I know we both agree is not a subset of Christianity. It's a false religion. Has nothing to do with Christianity. In your research on progressive Christianity and pastors and pulpits and churches and denominations that are advancing this false religion, for the people that are listening to this podcast, what are some of the red flags? I think of like a parent sending their college student off to, a university in the fall. I think of people transitioning and going to a new town and looking for a new church. What are the red flags that we can identify and say, that's not Christianity, that's progressive Christianity, whether it's a podcaster, thought leader, or a pastor?
Well, there are a lot of different flags depending on the context. So it would be one thing looking at a college, another thing looking at a church, but a couple of just broad things that I would point to. Number one, especially with a church, if the church doesn't have a statement of faith, I would just run very far away, because if they can't tell you right away what they believe, and make it very tied to Scripture, give scriptural references, and make sure that they're covering all of the core, doctrinal points that they should, that's a really big concern. Because a lot of churches that are very progressive, what you'll see on the What We Believe page, if they even have one, is it will be something very loose, like, we believe in kindness, we believe in compassion. Though that's not Christianity. Christianity is about who God is and who we are and our relationship and God's objective standards. I mean, we have so many things that we can talk about what should be on the statement of faith. So if it's a very broad one or it's not there at all, I would run very far away. Another really dead giveaway is anything that's talking so much about social justice, which I know at first sounds really bad, because it's like, don't we believe in justice as Christians? Yes, of course we believe in justice. Justice comes from God, right? But justice is about making right that which is wrong according to a standard. It all comes down to, what are you using as that standard? So as Christians, we want justice that is rooted in God as the objective standard to determine what is right and wrong. But the problem is, for progressives, that standard of justice is often rooted in something very different than God. And you can use a lot of different standards in the world today. It tends to be something like based on the power dynamics in society, which is a whole other subject. But you start to see these signs when you go to church websites, or you go to college websites, where they are prioritizing the talk of certain kinds of social justice. And that's why it's so confusing, because the language is tricky. It will sound good. They'll say that they really care about marginalized groups and hearing about quote unquote lived experiences from people. But that language is often coded language that comes from a neo-Marxist kind of worldview. So those are just a couple of things that I would point to, that either no statement of faith, or one that's very vague, or something that's really heavily focused on social justice as defined by the current cultural trends.
That's super helpful. How about for the parent or the grandparent that's thinking about, they have a heart for their children, their grandchildren, they look at the world looks like it's been caught on fire. It's a world in chaos. And I think it causes a lot of parents to maybe shelter their children in such a way that they're really not helping them understand kind of what's happening in the world, and really giving them a worldview that's rooted and grounded in God's word. What are some practical tips you can give parents, grandparents, to really help root them and ground them in God's word, so that they are sent out into the world prepared and ready for the mission?
Well, I think that there are basically four things that every kid needs in order to have a confident faith today. Number one is an understanding of what the Bible teaches. Number two is why believe it. Number three is what others believe. And number four is how to answer challenges. So I could talk for a whole hour, and I sometimes do at conferences on those four things, but those are really the different facets of what we need to be teaching kids today. And overwhelmingly, the default for people is to go to just the number one. It's what we believe. And of course, we need to teach our kids what the Bible teaches. That is the most fundamental thing that we need to be doing, but we need to be doing it at a much deeper level than what we typically are. So I would say, even when people tell me, oh yes, I'm definitely teaching my kids about the Bible, I would still push and say we need to go deeper with what we're actually teaching, because there's so much biblical illiteracy today and so much confusion in culture about that. But we do need to go to those next steps of talking about, why is there a good reason to believe that it's true? That's huge. You can tell your kids over and over and over again what's in the Bible, but unless you're actually talking to them about, why is this true? How can we know this? They're going to go out into a world that tells them that's ludicrous, that's crazy, that's, only stupid people who are anti-scientific believe that things like miracles can happen. These are the kinds of challenges that they're going to get. And if kids aren't prepared for them, and they don't know that there are good reasons to believe Christianity is true, then they're just going to think that it's just another, opinion that their parents had. So we really have to ground them in that. And then the third part of that, what other people believe, this is extremely important. And a lot of parents will push back on this and say, well, I'm not going to spend any time talking about what other people believe. I just want my kids to know the truth. But this is a mistake, because worldviews can be tricky. They can be confusing. If somebody tells your kid, hey, there is no God, your kid, if they grow up in a Christian home, is going to know, okay, that's in conflict with Christianity. However, in today's world, a lot of the confusion comes from it not being that clear cut. It's like what I was talking about earlier, when you start hearing people saying things like, oh yeah, we want to, really focus on lived experience, and we care so deeply about justice and about marginalized groups and oppression. Kids hear that and they think, well, that sounds like Christianity, and they don't realize there's a whole worldview under that that's producing concepts that basically there's a different dictionary for. And so we can't just teach our kids about truth. We have to teach them about the lies so that the truth becomes more clear and it becomes more valuable as well. So they have to understand what the culture around them believes. And then finally, how to answer challenges. Help your kids see the things that people are saying about Christianity. And sometimes parents and grandparents say, well, I don't want them to hear all of these things. But it's kind of like a lot of things in life. You want your kids to hear it from you first. Give them the opportunity to hear these challenges. I will send my kids things all the time. I'll text it to them and just say, hey, look at this article, or look at what this person is saying, and what worldview does that come from? How do we answer these kinds of challenges? So it's really important to prepare them to hear those things from us so that we can start to have a relationship where we're answering those questions, and from an early age. Anyone who has teenagers, I have 3 teenagers, anyone knows it gets harder to talk to your teenagers the older that they get, because they're busy and they're less interested in what mom and dad have to say. So start from a very young age. It's never too young.
When we think about the next generation being inundated with social media, just the constant feed, the scrolling on their phones all the time, and just the ideologies that they're being exposed to. And we could do a whole podcast just on my next question. But what would you say is 1 or 2 predominant issues you see in society that parents and churches, just Christians in general, are just either unaware of or just ignoring?
That's hard, because there are a lot of issues that kind of flock together. And I think that one of the biggest things that people just kind of tend to ignore is how does our faith actually shape how we influence the culture and what we should be doing? This is an important part of discipleship that most people don't think of as discipleship. They're only thinking of, how do I help you develop your personal faith? How do I lead you to Jesus? But then they're not going to the next step of thinking about, well, what does that mean for society? This is where kids will see a lot on social media as they're scrolling. They're going to see a lot of things today about, oh, look at these Christians who want to impose their values on you. Or can you believe that, these controlling Christians, these misogynists, they want to control what you do with your body. They're going to see all these kinds of claims. And even if parents are taking the time, and a lot of parents don't, but even for those who do, if they're taking the time to explain to their kids why the pro-life position, for example, is the position that is consistent with biblical Christianity, and why we should want a society that is pro-life, even if they're taking the time to do that, kids will not always understand. But why is it my position to say what other people can do? For example, why, even if I know that that's right, why should I tell other people what they can do? Or why should I want a society, for example, that tells minors who want to have some kind of surgical transition for their body to become another gender, why should I be able to tell them that? So there's a certain amount of discipleship that I think is being done very rarely with respect to helping kids understand how their beliefs should transform the public sphere.
Natasha, you just joined the board of the Institute for Faith and Culture. Honored to have you in that role. And you said something profound yesterday. You said we've got to make sure we understand the purpose and our tone in addressing these issues. Explain to our audience why tone matters as we're addressing the issues of our day.
Well, I think it matters a lot because there's an influencer culture, right? Where kids are used to seeing, not just kids, but adults, everyone is used to seeing people who are speaking out about the issues that are political in nature, and they're very controversial, and they're used to it being a very heated kind of subject. People are yelling at each other. Even Christian influencers in this area a lot of times are rightly being passionate about it, but sometimes it doesn't come across in the right way. And, to some degree, I think we can overtone police ourselves, where there's a certain amount of that goes on. But I think that it really matters how we talk about these things because we've got truth on our side. right? So we should be able to calmly and reasonably discuss these issues and explain to kids, if we're talking about discipleship, explain to kids why this is not a matter of yelling back and forth, but it is a matter of advocating for righteousness in society, that God cares about the righteous functioning of our world. And as Christians, here we are with this enormous opportunity to represent the Lord and to represent truth and to explain to others why that truth is so important. And I think so much of it comes from trying to understand the other side's view. And sometimes when people hear that, they say, oh, that it sounds like you're spending too much time like trying to really, finesse this with the other side. But the reason that I say that's so important, I spend a lot of time on this in my book, When Culture Hates You, is that when you understand what they're saying, then you can actually speak directly to their view in understanding that. So when it comes to something like the pro-life issue, for example, understanding that most people who are pro-choice are not saying, yes, I really love killing babies, but they're saying you're bringing harm to women, will transform how you start talking about that issue, because now you can address specifically what they're talking about. Doesn't mean they're going to agree with you necessarily, but at least you can have a better chance of speaking to them on the level that they might be hearing you. And so there are ways that we can talk better with culture. It starts with understanding what the other side is saying, finding some common ground where we can, and then speaking up God's truth.
I'm just curious, and be honest with me. We both grew up in an age where apologetics was your basic classical apologetic model, kind of defending the existence of God, defending the existence of truth, and obviously we both believe we need to raise our children, raise the next generation to have those tools in their toolbox. But would you say that apologetics also needs kind of a next level because of the change and the shift in our culture? I mean, we talk a lot about cultural apologetics, which obviously would be slightly different than classical apologetics. But do you believe that we need to shift our focus on how we teach our kids how to defend our faith? Or do you feel like the old model is just as good as it was then, and we can kind of still use those tools today?
Well, the arguments are going to be the same. You
Yeah.
know, if you're looking at what's an argument for God's existence, you're still going to have those same arguments that you should be able to teach your kids and
Sure.
to be able to dialogue with. But it's how you apply them, I
Yeah.
think, that changes in different
Okay.
cultures,
Yeah, that's
right? I
helpful.
mean, you can go back to the Bible and see that they're already having to find certain ways to defend truth when it came to the certain types of heresies that were coming up at the time, like Gnosticism,
Sure.
for example, right? So it's the same concept today.
Yeah.
We're just in a different time where we have to apply in different ways. And there are certain issues that become sort of the forefront issues that we have to grapple with today. And so we have to be good apologists when it comes to some of the things that come up the most frequently. And so I do think that that has got to be part of our discipleship, that it's not just here are the basic arguments for God's existence and biblical reliability. And to be honest, I'd be thrilled if we could even get that far with most of the church, because
Sure.
we're not even getting there.
Sure.
But once we get to that point, I would love to then see it taken to the next level of, okay, now how do you apply that to these specific issues? And what does that mean for what exactly we should advocate for in the public square?
Final question. We often talk in general terms about Christians staying silent in this cultural moment out of fear. But as I travel the country, I don't know about you, I just find an apathetic kind of mindset. It's neither bold nor fearful. It's just, I don't care. Apathetic pastors, apathetic Christians. Would you agree with that? And what would you say to the apathetic Christian, maybe even listening to this podcast, going, well, okay, seems like there's some problems out in the world, but hopefully Rob and Natasha will handle them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think apathy is a huge problem in the church. People are apathetic until something happens to them. Unfortunately, this is the pattern that I have seen over and over, and that I hear directly from people, where for years I would have to, I'd go out and do talks with Christian parents, different churches, and I would have to try to get them to care about things like apologetics, because they were very apathetic. So I wasn't even teaching apologetics. I was basically out there saying you need to care about apologetics. Yeah. And over time, I have seen that change a bit, especially for parents, because now I don't have to spend so much time saying, hey, this is why you should care. Their kids are experiencing the challenges. Their kids are now seeing things on social media, and they're coming home and they're saying that, they see this or that, and, why should I believe this? Or, why does the Bible talk about this? So now they care. Parents overwhelmingly are starting to care more because they have to. It's not even necessarily because they want to and that they realize, wow, I really should learn how to defend my faith. The Bible says we should be able to give a reason for the hope that we have. It's not even that. It's that they've been put in a position where circumstances have said, you need to care. You need to care. And so I do think that Christians start caring when there's a reason to. I've seen a lot of older Christians who start caring because their adult kids have cut them off, for example. When that happens, they care. Yeah. Now they want to understand, wait, why do they think I'm toxic? I've never even said anything, and it's just because I'm a Christian. Now they care. And so unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's the case. They're not going to care until they are in a position where they have to care. But for the Christian who hasn't been put in that position yet, who might be listening, I would say you're going to be in that position. And so prepare for that time, because the Lord said that we are to be salt and light in this culture. And when we have been warned that it was going to be difficult, that families would be torn apart, we should start asking ourselves, if we're just apathetic and we're not actually caring about the things that are going on in our culture, then maybe it's because we're not living the way that the Lord taught us to. Maybe it's because we're silent and we're not actually speaking up for truth. And someday we're all accountable to God. To one, we are accountable to God, not to man. And if we're not living up to our calling, we're going to face the Lord about that someday.
Yeah. You'd have to be ignorant to not realize all of the moments in history where Christians were silent.
Yes.
We think of the silence of the church in Nazi Germany, and countless other examples of when the church was silent, and those nations, those societies collapse. They flounder, and most of them never truly recover. So hopefully it's a wake-up call, what's happening in our culture here in America, and Christians would get engaged. And I thank you for being engaged. Thank you for being at our Kingdom Come conference. Thank you for being a part of the Institute for Faith and Culture, and thanks for joining me today on the City of God.
It's an honor. Thank you so much.
I'm so pleased to have Natasha serving on the advisory board of the Institute for Faith and Culture. God is using her in this critical moment to awaken parents, and I hope today's conversation awakens something in you. If it did, would you take a moment, leave a 5-star review, and tell us what you learned? You can stay connected with me and Coral Ridge Ministries throughout the week by following us on social media. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. This City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.